All right, welcome everyone, and welcome to the last session of Saturday for our National War Tax Resistance Conference. Very excited about this panel with that's definitely focused definitely on the now. Some of our previous sessions today were kind of looking at a little bit of history and how-tos, and this one is very looking at as the title states, resisting taxes in the Trump era from some different perspectives. And so with our panelists, first we'll be hearing from Annalisa Gross, who's been very involved with Choose Democracy's tax strike campaign, and she'll be sharing us information about that. I know been sharing we've hosted some events together, and I know a lot of people have heard about them because they've been emailing me and saying, who's this Choose Democracy? Who are those folks who are promoting war tax resistance? So first we'll hear from Annalisa, then we'll hear from Seth Donnelly, who's with Taxpayers Against Genocide, who I know I've also gotten a lot of emails over the last few months as they sued some of their representatives about how taxpayer money in the United States is being used to support genocide. And then lastly, we'll hear from David Gross, longtime war tax resistor and friend of Nutric, who has written numerous books on the topic of war tax resistance. And one of those books has recently he converted into an ebook that anyone can access online. And as we get to David, I will share that link in the chat so people can check that out if they want. And David will be kind of talking more generally about being a war tax resistor and possible risks or how that could change or what it might look like under Trump, so anyways, great panel. And I will first hand it over to Annalisa.
Thank you, Lincoln, and it's wonderful to be with all of you, and I'll keep myself unmuted. Before I tell you a little bit about Choose Democracy and our national tax strike, I want to just let you know that I was raised to be a war tax resistor. My parents always have been. That was part of their commitment in their marriage, and so I grew up in a household that did live that way. And so then I've always chosen that as an adult too. So I was already very familiar with your work and pointing people to your resources. And then my good friend Daniel Hunter, who is the main founder of Choose Democracy, said, it's time to expand this tax resistance movement to people who would have never thought of themselves as a tax resistor, but are alarmed about what's happening with the federal administration and the federal budget right now. So that's how I came into this work with Choose Democracy. And I've been grateful for my long background with tax resistance, but also aware of how unappealing it can sound to a lot of people, because I was that kid who grew up like not being able to have things that other people had, like when everybody in my church youth group went on a ski trip and I couldn't go because we didn't have money for stuff like that. This is stuff I'm grateful for now, but I remember as a young person how hard that was. And so when I think about how the general community around us perceived my parents or the other family we share our farm with, who are also war tax resistors, I think it was some combination of these people are heroes, these people are martyrs, these people are idealists. And our background is from a faith perspective where pacifism and nonviolence is part of our faith commitment. And so being war tax resistors was, for the most part, private. It was in no way secret, but it was part of an act of faith. And so it wasn't something we talked about very publicly. So all of that is what I'm trying to do differently now as I do it as part of Choose Democracy's national tax strike. It's the same kind of activity, but I use different language for it. And so I'm going to show you a couple slides. It's most taxstrike.info is our website. So instead of talking about immoral or unethical uses of our tax dollars, still totally true, we talk about illegal or unconstitutional uses of our tax dollars. And that word strike, we talked quite a long time about using the word strike rather than tax resistance to call it a tax strike. because a lot of people are familiar with the concept of a work strike more than they are with tax resistance. And so to give them the image strike and then apply it to this new territory of tax resistance felt like a good bridge. You strike until the bosses make the workplace safe. You have a specific demand and you strike until that time. So I'll be transparent with you. I'm not going to start paying taxes even if Trump is out of office. But for the purposes of the national tax strike, we have some very specific goals. And I'll show you what those are in a minute, but I wanted to say some of the historical movements we've been lifting up would include Gandhi's Salt March, which was part of a strike because of the taxes that were imposed on salt, and the British women's suffrage movement saying, we're not going to vote, we're not going to, until you give us a vote, we're not going to pay taxes. So those were specific political movements that used a tax strike as one tactic to achieve their greater goal of independence from Britain, having a vote. And so I would say for my parents and the household I grew up in, ending war would be the end goal. And the tax resistance is one tactic of that greater aim of ending war. But for the national tax strike, the goal is to have a constitutional crisis end and have checks and balances put back into place. So these are the goals that we list, is to safeguard and uphold the Constitution, restore checks and balances, audit Doge, get Elon Musk out of there, and have tax reform. Maybe people who join the tax strike will keep doing tax resistance for the long haul, but if it's the first time they've ever thought about it, it's helpful to have a clear sense of what is the purpose for this, how long is this going to last, or just to think of it as something that is time bound potentially. And we did become an affiliate of Newtrick because we use your resources constantly because you have the best information for people. So we are formally an affiliate, and we have repackaged only a small chunk of the information you have on your site into more digestible amounts of information on ours, which includes, thanks to Lincoln, 3 short videos. One is for somebody who's employed and has a W-4, one is for someone who's self-employed and does not, and the third is for someone who's retired. And those are between 2 minutes and 8 minutes. Of course, mine was the longest because I'm very wordy and I asked Lincoln a lot of questions, but those are just back and forth Q&As with somebody who's a worker asking Lincoln questions, somebody who's self-employed, or someone who's retired asking Lincoln questions. So feel free to share those around. We also have an FAQ section, and a lot of those answers we thank Newtrick for helping us find, and we point back to your site a lot. One more way we were trying to make the biggest tent possible for getting this national tax strike launched is a phrase we're using to practice slow taxes. So for someone who's not ready to take on any risk, one of our invitations leading up to April 15 of 2025 was to practice slow taxes. If you thought you were going to owe something, wait until April 15, print out your returns, even if you worked through them online, print it out, put it in the mail on April 15th, or file for an extension and don't send your stuff in until October. Of course, we reminded people that if you owe something, it's officially still due in April. All of that to slow down the process. And we've definitely been championing the whole, if you get a W-4, consider changing your W-4 now. So slow taxes could have been somebody's like dipping their toe into the whole concept of tax resistance, but they haven't taken a risk yet. And we worked pretty hard, all of us being volunteers, of course, you know how that is. We worked pretty hard to get a lot of information ready and had a couple webinars before April 15th. I'll be honest, then we kind of sat back and haven't been doing a lot since then, feeling like we wanted to catch our breath a little. And we also wanted to see how the message is spreading out into the broader world, what's catching on and what's not. We've had a lot of interfacing with religious communities, Mennonites and Church of the Brethren, because they do have a history of nonviolent civil disobedience and resistance, and a lot of tax strikers or tax resistors. And the last thing, oh, and I will invite you, if you would like to go to our site, taxstrike.info, feel free to click join our community. All that does is add you to our email list, and we don't send a lot. I understand that if you don't need any more information about tax resistance, I get that. But if there's somebody in your orbit who isn't a pacifist, isn't against war, but might be inclined to resist taxes in this Trump administration, we are trying to package information just for them. And finally, we've been encouraging and doing it ourselves. This is my public letter to the editor saying that I won't be paying taxes during this administration or until these goals are achieved. I didn't get into explaining I won't pay taxes after that either, because I wanted to make the point to catch people who are just pissed off right now and didn't really care 3 years ago. As much as that breaks my heart that they didn't care, I want them to find their way now into the movement. And we are trying, Choose Democracy is trying a lot of tactics at once, having studied nonviolent social movements throughout the world and what has worked. And we do believe that a tax strike and tax resistance will be part of the puzzle of bringing down the Trump regime. So that's all I wanted to tell you, but I will stick around to hear from others and hear what questions come up too. Let me with you.
Thank you so much, Annalisa. I appreciate it. And I'll pass it over to Seth.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Annalisa. That was amazing. And as a recovering high school teacher for many years, I like also just the aesthetics of your presentation, how you could have your face with that was pretty cool. But no, seriously, the information was amazing. And I think there's going to be well, obviously there's going to be a lot of synergy between the different forms of resistance and striking. And so I'm excited to incorporate what I'm learning today into our network, which is primarily in California, but it's spread across the country. So as Lincoln mentioned, I'm with Taxpayers Against Genocide, and we started like many of you, I'm sure, there was constant efforts to try to get our persons to stop allocating our tax dollars as military aid to Israel during the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And like many of you, we're also opposed to the big picture of the budget period in which the over half the discretionary budget goes to the military industrial complex and to maintenance of 800 bases. Um, and so we approach it with that big picture and also with the immediacy that there's a live stream genocide happening in our own lifetime. And so I have a few slides I can share with you. And this is our web. So I'm based in Northern California, and as the genocide in Gaza intensified, many of us went to our city councils trying to get ceasefire resolutions. Of course, we were in the large street protests that were occurring all across the country, demanding an end to military aid. It was a coalition of Palestinian activists, Jewish activists, and folks like myself that are neither, but that are in full solidarity. And in some cases, we got some victories with the ceasefire resolutions, but a lot of times we didn't. The city councils remained recalcitrant in refusing to intervene. And in our case, with our Congress folks, um, our reps in the House out here in Northern California continued to send billions of our tax dollars in military aid to Israel. Most importantly, last April 20th, there was a huge vote, some of you may know, in which the House, the Israeli Supplemental Security Act, the House re-upped 26.38 billion more in military aid. and 3 days later the Senate did the same. In the Senate version, they combined it with military aid to the Ukraine and Taiwan. So it was an omnibus bill, but they also maintained the billions in military aid to Israel at the height of the genocide. So we came out, this is last summer. This is one of California's famous opulent wineries, and our representative, Mike Thompson, was having his annual summer fundraiser at the winery. And so we came and established a picket line and again, demanding that he change course with using our tax dollars. He did not, nor did we found each other across different county lines. Initially, the 10 counties in Northern California, from Sonoma County all the way up to the Oregon border, our two reps were Mike Thompson, and then the other one is featured right there is Jared Huffman. And by virtue of all working together to protest them and seeing that they refused to change their positions, we decided to, as taxpayers, try something different. And of course, many of us also will participate in or already are participating in other forms of tax resistance. But we also wanted to go and we wanted to wage a class action. And so on December 19th, 2024, we filed a historic class action in the Northern District of California in the federal court there, and we had at that time from each county we had what were called class reps, the plaintiffs on record. Like this is uh, wonderful comrade Tariq Kanana, who's a Palestinian leader out here in Sonoma County, one of the class reps. Um, but there was all these reps from different counties, and then we had 500 members of the class action, and again covering 10 counties. And initially the first two defendants were Mike Thompson and Jared Huffman. This is the day we filed the lawsuit. That's in front of the federal court building. No taxes for genocide. They were served summons on Christmas Eve, actually in D.C. So this was the initial corridor, right up here, the first red. But then interest in the class action went viral, primarily in California, but also across the country. So we amended the complaint with our attorney to include all counties in the red here that are part of the same federal court district. And so we grew to have 47 plaintiffs or class reps and a class size of 1,500 people, nearly 2,000 by the time we were done. And we expanded the defendants to include not just Thompson and Huffman, but also Nancy Pelosi, Panetta. These are all reps, and then our senators as well. The argument of the essence of the case, and also we served Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who was responsible for disbursing under Biden, implementing the tax dollars that Congress had appropriated. So it was a very serious lawsuit, and it was occurring, and I'll kind of I know I've only got 15 minutes, so I'm going to keep it moving. But just to remind folks, by April 20th, when our Congress folks voted to re-up the military aid, the evidence of genocide was overwhelming, just as it's even more overwhelming today, right? In January, the ICJ had already opened up a case against Israel for plausible genocide. In February, this is all again before April, February, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch issued reports saying that Israel was defying the ICJ provisions. And then in March 24th, UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese issued her stark report, Anatomy of a Genocide, arguing that Israel had clearly crossed the threshold and was carrying out systematic extermination in Gaza. So our Congress people knew it. In fact, some of my high school students had met with Thompson in January, 4 months before he voted, and pled with him not to use their parents' tax dollars to carry out this ongoing genocide. So our argument was they knew it, the evidence was clear, and yet they continued to illegally use our tax dollars. Of course, it's unethical to use tax dollars to fund genocide, but it's also illegal. And so with our legal team, we began researching more and more that that, and I'll give you the shorthand of this, that Congress has power of the purse, the ability to appropriate and allocate our tax dollars, but that has to occur within the parameters of what Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution calls the general welfare and common defense. And by no stretch of the imagination is um, funding the extermination of the Palestinian people the general welfare of the United States or the common defense. The Constitution also establishes that treaties the U.S. has ratified become the supreme law of the land. And so the U.S. had ratified the Convention on Genocide back in 1988, and that prohibits complicity in genocide. And so the U.S., using our tax dollars to fund this genocide, to fund the 2,000-pound bombs, to support Israel through thick and thin to carry this out, meant that the U.S. was not only complicit, it was really a co-pilot. It was directly participating with our tax dollars, and this was resulting in uh, first and foremost, the extermination of the Palestinian people, but also as taxpayers here to, especially our Palestinian taxpayers, various forms of emotional, psychological distress and moral injury. And so that was the essence of our argument. Um, Predictably, the judge assigned to it dismissed the case. I'll skim through that, skip that. Um, on the same grounds that the federal court had rejected a previous class action against Biden about a year earlier. And the argument they used in our case in that previous class action is that the court system does not make policy for the other branches of government. And they said that we were asking the court system to make foreign policy. Uh, of course, this is not what we were doing. We were saying they can't use our tax dollars to fund genocide, and they have to follow treaties and they have to follow the Constitution. And of course, the court system all the time makes policy for the other branches of government, right? It makes policy in terms of recently, there's been a slew of rulings about can Doge fire people? Can, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Can Trump cut off USAID funding? But when it comes to genocide and war crimes, they want to say that the courts have no power, that they don't intervene. And so even though they threw our case out, we have decided, as we were gathering more momentum as taxpayers, and it was kind of hitting a mass movement spark across the country, that we were going to take our case as taxpayers to the international arena. And so to conclude and wrap up my part of the presentation, in April, we this about 4 weeks ago, we filed a complaint on behalf of 2,000 taxpayers with the United Nations Human Rights Council as part of its periodic review of the United States, arguing that the U.S. government was complicit in genocide, and asking for the court, the UN, I'm sorry, the UN Human Rights Council to intervene. And then, as this flyer shows, in 2 weeks from now, and I'll put it in the chat too, we're mobilizing to go to DC, and we're going to file an official complaint with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. That's the OAS's official body for human rights complaints in the Americas, charging the U.S. government, both Democrats and Republicans who've participated, with complicity in genocide. And if they unfortunately can't prosecute the United States, but they can have a hearing and have a finding of guilt. And if they do, that becomes part of a growing body of evidence to further hold our government accountable. And at the same time, we're building a movement of taxpayers to say no to genocide. Um, so I'll put that in the chat. Oh, stop. And the last thing I'll say is we're really honored to be working with the attorney Huwaida Araf, who is and the National Lawyers Guild. They're partnering with us for these complaints and for this Inter-American Commission complaint. And Huwaida is also one of the folks who's done a lot of work around the flotillas. And I'm sure you've heard about the flotilla that was just attacked. Um, so she's an incredible attorney, an incredible activist, and so it's really been galvanizing for us as taxpayers to work with such a great legal team. And we do think we're not going to give up. We're going to keep fighting to stop U.S. impunity. And of course, the immediacy of genocide that's the first and foremost, all hands on deck to stop that. But beyond that, we're committed to uprooting the whole military industrial complex and the siphoning of our tax dollars of maintenance of empire at the expense of basic human needs and human rights right here at home. So I appreciate you all and thank you. And I look forward to some dialogue. Let me put that flyer in the chat, and then you all can hopefully pass the word if you know anybody in the DC East Coast area.
All right. Thank you, Seth. That was fantastic. And I will pass it over to David.
Thank you. So what I'm going to be talking about today is how we as tax resistors are going to need to adjust to the Trump administration. The short version of what I'm going to say is that we can no longer reliably extrapolate from long-standing precedent about how the government operates or how it responds to tax resistors to anticipate what's going to be happening in the near future. Past tax policy changes have been slow, gradual, predictable in advance, but in the near future, our changes are likely to be abrupt, arbitrary, and unstable. So there are 5 facets of this that I want to talk about in particular. These are things that I think we should be aware of and observant about and prepared for, but it's too early to draw strong conclusions about any of them. And these 5 things are changes that are going on at the IRS, whether this portends a possible end of the income tax, federal income tax, the effect of expanded interagency government information sharing, the anti-Trumpery movement and whether tax resistance has a role to play in it, and if so, what role Newtrick has to play in that. And finally, tariffs and the extent to which there be a greater component of the funding for the military budget, and to what extent that gives us opportunities or I guess challenges in how we as indirect taxpayers of tariffs can resist them. So first on that list is the changes at the IRS. You've probably noticed there's been a lot of churn in Washington lately. There have been 4 acting IRS commissioners already in the Trump administration. These have served between 4 days and 6.5 weeks. So it's even at the very top, there's just been a whole lot of disruption. There is no Senate confirmed IRS commissioner yet. And I don't even think the hearings have been scheduled for that. There have been a lot of personnel dismissals and reductions in force at the agency already. And under the budget that Trump has just released, there's expected to be another drop of between 25 and 50% of the personnel at the IRS are going to be leaving. So, and enforcement and collection has not been spared from this, by the way. It's sort of all across the agency. The agency was already kind of on the ropes ahead of time. Their personnel, their funding had been going down for years. There was a little blip up during the Biden administration, and they were starting to recover a bit. But just as they were bringing some new people on board, getting some new technology on board, the Trump administration hit and blew it all up. So they were already really struggling. And as war tax resistors, we know this because they're having a double of the time catching up with us and doing any sort of collection activity. And it's only going to get worse. The capabilities of the agency are really degraded at this point. The second thing is that there's a collapse of the post-Nixon consensus that's been the rule for the last 50 years or so, that the IRS should be shielded from political decisions. In other words, the president shouldn't be able to tell the IRS, hey, you should audit so-and-so, I don't like them. That's ended now. Trump has appointed a political appointee to be in charge of the criminal investigation division at the IRS. And in general, he's just signaling with everything he's doing in the executive branch that all bets are off as far as using agencies to pursue political enemies and also to shake down deep-pocketed victims. So we can expect that to start happening with the IRS as well. Does this affect us? Probably not yet, because we're not on Trump's radar. But if we become more effective or more loud, or somehow there's a hate week about war tax resistors, or if tax resistance becomes a big part of the anti-Trump resistance, that could change really quickly. And then all of a sudden, Trump says, you know, your new marching orders, IRS, are to go after these radicals and knock them out. So we should be ready for that possibility. Second thing I want to talk about is, does this mean the federal income tax is going away? Trump has repeatedly claimed in Twitter and the like that he wants to replace the Internal Revenue Service with an external revenue service that would be funded by tariffs. So get rid of the income tax and run the government off of tariffs entirely. The fellow he nominated to be the IRS commissioner, Billy Long, when he was in Congress, was the co-sponsor of a bill to abolish the IRS and replace the income tax with a sales tax. So this idea of replacing income taxes with consumption taxes is something that's been floating around in conservative circles for many years now. It's never gotten enough traction to really get off the ground, but maybe this is its time. The serious people mostly don't think it's going to happen because it would be too onerous to accomplish and would likely go very, very bad. But Trump has an appetite for things that go very, very bad and are very, very disruptive. So I think we have to consider the possibility that he's actually serious about this and really wants to take it to the finish line. It would require congressional action. He wouldn't be able to abolish the income tax just by executive order, but he could potentially force the hand of Congress by doing this. He could unilaterally enact tariffs, which he can do and he has done. And then he could make the IRS so dysfunctional that it could no longer effectively collect income taxes, which kind of seems like what he's doing. And then at that point, Congress would think, well, if we want to continue spending taxpayer money, and why did we go to Congress if we didn't want to do that? Then the only choice left to us is to give Trump the authority to raise the tariffs as high as he wants so we can continue to have money to spend. So if something like that happened, where would that leave us as war tax resistors with no income tax to resist anymore? Well, we'd have to retool to resist in a different way. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. None of this is likely to happen anytime soon. The current Trump proposals are for income tax cuts, but not elimination of the income tax. So this is probably a year or two down the line at the earliest. Third thing on my list is expanded information sharing among federal agencies. So for a long time, the different agencies in the executive branch did not share a great deal of information with each other. This was seen to be a problem after 9/11, and the Department of Homeland Security sort of became an umbrella group among several of the agencies and enabled a lot more information sharing between them. But there were still a lot of firewalls or sometimes just bureaucratic hurdles, or the fact that one agency had set up their databases in one way and another agency in another. But a lot of this now seems to be dropping to Doge and Elon Musk's crew. They're sending their team of hackers in and changing all the software and changing all the IT and basically trying to pull all of the data in and make it available centrally to the executive branch, and particularly to the political operatives. Most of the news I've seen about this is in the context of the crackdown on immigrants. So for instance, the IRS is now sharing information from tax forms with ICE so that ICE can go and track down immigrants that they wanted to deport. The US Postal Service, they take a photo of every envelope that goes by their system and scan that in. And now they're sharing those addresses also with ICE to help them find immigrants. So there's a lot more information sharing going on, and this is probably going to continue to accelerate. This could affect us in some ways. It could make it easier for the IRS to find assets or to find income that was previously in the shadows. I don't see any sign yet that this is actually happening, but it's still early going. I think it's worth keeping on the radar, and I think if anybody in our network has assets that they consider safe now because they just haven't been touched in years, and any of that gets attached or the IRS seems to be paying attention to it, I think it's a good idea to really raise the alarm about that so the rest of the network becomes aware. Because as I said before, we're going to be seeing a lot more arbitrary and abrupt changes that come as a surprise now. And so the more we can communicate about that, the more we can avoid getting tripped up by those surprises. Fourth thing I want to talk about is the anti-Trumpery movement and whether tax resistance has a place in it. I think it probably does. There's a lot of urgency for some sort of strong collective grassroots action against Trumpery. And the leadership of national groups or Democratic Party or groups that are associated with it are taking fairly timid actions at this point. So I can see there being a groundswell of need for something like the national tax strike. If it does happen, though, where do we fit in as war tax resistors? Because the anti-Trumpery tax resistance isn't really war tax resistance. We can metaphorically stretch the description of war tax resistance to cover things like deportations, the collapse of civil liberties and due process, the constitutional crisis, fascism, white supremacy, and the like. But it's an awkward stretch. It's not as convincing. Most of our outreach and educational material assumes that war and militarism are the focal concern of the tax resistor. And this is potentially going to be alienating or confusing to some of the new resistors who come in and are resisting for other reasons. This, unless Trump invades Greenland or Canada or something like that, in which case the anti-Trump movement becomes an anti-war movement by definition. Can't rule that out. Penalty Fund has decided to explicitly welcome anti-Trumpery tax resistors as well as the traditional war tax resistors into their protection. And I think maybe as Newsweek, maybe we can learn from the process that they went through to make that decision and expand their focus to help us welcome a new generation of war tax resistors. The last thing I want to talk about is tariffs. So Trump clearly would like to see tariffs become a larger part of government income and therefore government funding for the Pentagon. And it creates some interesting challenges for us if that turns out to be a success. So tariffs are taxes that apply to imported goods that are paid by the importer. So of course we can resist to some extent by simply not importing goods ourselves so that we don't personally pay the tax. But most of us will be paying this tax indirectly as a consumer of goods that have imported elements to them. It's important to note that the tariffs apply not only to consumer-ready goods that come into the United States, like cars, for instance, but they also apply to raw materials and intermediate manufacturing goods. So you can't resist by simply looking for, the Made in USA sign on the bottom of your good and assume that if it says Made in USA, there was no tariff on it. Pretty much everything is going to have tariffs applied to it because of the raw materials and intermediate goods that get tariffs applied to them on the way. So we need to consider some new strategies if this becomes something we need to worry about. There are a few that I think are worth having in our toolbox. These will include just general anti-consumerism lifestyle simplification. The less money you're spending, the less tariffs you'll be buying. Also, similar grounds, do it yourself, grow your own, reduce, reuse, recycle, any of that stuff, anything that takes things out of the marketplace and satisfies your needs without engaging in economic transactions, reduces the amount of money that would be spent on tariffs. Smuggling. So smuggling is not a real big thing in the United States right now, and that's because we have had traditionally fairly low tariffs at the border. If that changes, then the situation will change. In New York, for instance, cigarette taxes are extremely high. And so it's no surprise that more than half of the cigarettes smoked in New York come from out of the state. They're smuggled in. The same thing is going to happen with any other good if the tariffs are rising high enough. So if the tariffs rise high, and particularly if the Republicans decide they're going to throw a use tax and a sales tax on top of goods to replace the income tax, all of a sudden smuggling is going to become very, very lucrative. And when that happens, smuggling will start to develop inevitably. So we can both help that happen. We could do it ourselves if we've got the gumption. We can also help make the smuggling networks visible to consumers and do more of our shopping with smuggled goods ourselves. Another option. A more lawful action would be domestic manufacture of goods that are typically imported. If you notice some good that is imported or that the raw materials are imported and you could figure out a way to make it yourself with domestic goods, domestic raw materials, then you can pull money away from the tariffs that way. And I think, in part, that's what Trump is intending to do with the tariffs, is stimulate domestic manufacture, restart these sorts of industries. So it may sting a little bit if you're using this technique that you're kind of cooperating with Trump in helping his tariffs do what he wants them to do. But on the other hand, it is a good way of pulling money out of the system of tariffs and reducing the amount that goes to the government and therefore to the military. We could also invent or discover or publicize avoidance strategies. Sales tax is going to be accompanied by lots of rules, lots of red tape, lots of exceptions, lots of lobbyists lobbying for their own little thing. In all of this, there's going to be ways to game the system. And we can help learn those ways by learning what the regulations are. We can find out the ones that are being used and copy them and spread the news about them. We can basically help people evade and avoid the tariffs and other taxes. And the final tactic that we could consider is just disrupting the tariff collecting bureaucracy. And this would be the same way that we might disrupt the IRS today. Lawsuits, red tape, corresponding with them, anything that makes the tax collector's job harder is something we could also use against the tariff collection bureaucracy. So any of these tactics that I've talked about that apply to tariffs also really apply to use tax and sales tax. If that comes to pass, then these sorts of tactics will also be useful. And all right, I'm going to stop right there.
All right. Thank you so much, David. And thank you to everyone on this panel. This is everything I felt was so comprehensive and clear and so well thought out and helpful. So I'll open it up for if you have a question. With all the people here, I cannot see everyone on my screen. So that means for some people, that tried and true method of just like waving your hand, I probably won't see you. So just remember, if you don't have a raise your hand button on your screen, there's the 3 dots button that says more. And if you click on that, or you'll see reactions and you can raise your hand there, or maybe you have a reactions button. And if you go to reactions, one of the reactions that's a big button is to raise your hand. All right. I do happen to see you, Kathy, just by luck. But all right, Kathy. You're muted, Kathy.
You mean
Okay.
Boylan, Kathy Boylan?
No, it's
There you go. Okay.
I just received a couple of emails a little earlier today about tariffs. One started with my daughter saying, "What on earth can I do to stop this juggernaut of Trump, blah, blah, blah." And I wrote down, "Stop paying for it." So another member of the family wrote back that Trump doesn't need our federal income tax anymore because now he's going to use tariffs. And I didn't understand that until you started talking today about that. That's amazing that he might even really consider closing the IRS and finding another way, like through tariffs, to get the money he needs to fund what he's funding, which is the militarism and genocide, etc. I just wanted to let you know that was very apropos what you had to say, and now I have something to come back with, because I was like flummoxed by what's he talking about, how we're going to get tariffs instead of taxes, So thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Other questions, comments?
Bob has his hand up.
All right, thank you. Bob.
Yeah, thanks. So I've been thinking about this topic a lot lately, and I think as a couple of other people have said, this is not war tax resistance, but it's tax resistance. And in a way, it's taxation without representation, particularly because, the Congress has allocated money to certain organizations, and the Trump administration is not letting that money get sent to these organizations. So what I'm thinking is that, you know, getting together in groups of people that refuse to pay all or part of their taxes, it has to be done publicly, because otherwise it's like a tree falling in the forest when nobody's around. Um, and it should include redirection of that money to the agencies that are being denied the money. Um, and, you know, as David was saying, it's unpredictable what the Trump administration will do. You know, what we've all experienced, or many of us for decades, is this sort of slow, deliberate process with the IRS and so on and so forth. That might not happen. But this is this should be Gandhian civil disobedience. The people that went on the Salt March were not safe. They were living with risk. And those of us that do this should accept that we'll be living with risk. And if it comes out well, other people will join us. Nonviolence requires suffering for it to be powerful and successful. That's hard for a lot of people to accept. But if we can accept that, and if we can band together and support each other, this could be the genesis of a very powerful resistance movement to stop this, you know, turning America into a fascist state.
All right, thank you, Bob. And Patricia.
Yeah, I have a question for Taxpayers Against Genocide, and I'm sorry if not keeping everyone's name straight. In terms of like concrete ways to be involved and help, to the March 14th protest and march is awesome, and I'm going to share that with the interfaith group that I've been working with here in Worcester around this genocide. And what other ways, like when you had talked about how it quickly went viral, what were some of the ways that people in other states across the country were concretely getting involved? And how can we be helpful here in Worcester?
Well, thank you for the question, Patricia. I'm glad you asked because I was feeling a little bit of the pressure of time. But, you know, one way that's ongoing is other parts of the country are interested in pursuing a class action. We got shut down by the federal district court out here in California, and we didn't take it to the circuit court level, which is right above, because our circuit court had already ruled against that Biden class action that I mentioned. And we felt that if we went back to the same circuit court, we would just reinforce a bad precedent. We were hoping initially that we might have a different outcome with the district court because this angle of taxpayer money, it's a domestic issue, not just a quote unquote foreign policy issue. But there's other districts, you know, I think the United States has 12 or 13 court districts. And depending on the judge in the district, they may have better luck with a class action. And because we think that the argument that was used against us is pretty, it's clearly superficial and false. And so we know people in New York are interested in a class action, people in Minnesota. So one way is to be on this conference. Just feel free to direct message me, and I'll put my email in the chat here, and we can, you know, talk about that. We're committed to sharing all aspects of our legal argument with anybody else in the country if they want to pursue their own class action. Beyond that, in the jot form I put in the I put in the chat, which I'll put again here. When you sign up to that, you become part of a database that of taxpayers across the country that we want to organize together. And so one way is, of course, DC, but that's just around the corner. Beyond the DC action, there's still going to be ongoing mobilization to develop forms of activism in our various congressional districts to call out our congresspeople for genocide and to build on the international momentum we have while the UN ruling and while the ICHR ruling are still pending. We want to develop organizing in all these districts whether it's a Republican or Democrat, poster campaigns, popular education, calling out politicians for using our tax dollars to fund genocide.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Seth.
Yeah, thank you.
Follow up.
Thanks. I don't know if it's pronounced Mish or Mitch. And then I have Carl and then Angela.
Thank you. I'm not sure if maybe my question was answered by what Annalisa put in the chat box, but it seemed to me that I think it was Bob was the name of the speaker just before, that the points that he was raising led back to a question that Annalisa was asked on chat during the first presentation about what those other kind of how she saw a constellation of possible actions, and it just struck me that this is a moment to maybe answer some of that, or from wherever we are now, or take steps towards flushing that out a bit, I guess. I hope that made sense.
I think so. Yeah, I did reply some in the chat, but I was also trying not to disrupt the ongoing presentations. But some of you might be familiar with Choose Democracy's resource, What Will You Do If Trump Wins? I'm going to put a link to that in the chat. It's whatiftrumpwins.org. That's a publication. You can use it online, or you can use it in an actual paper book. Whatiftrumpwins.org, that we put together as building out choose your own adventure scenarios. This was before the election, but with the possibility that Trump would win or Biden would win. And then we had to redesign it real quick if Trump would win or Harris would win. And then what if Trump sends the National Guard to this, but all these different iterations. So take a look through that at some point if you're interested. Even though Trump's now in office, some of the scenarios of him winning play out to, like, he calls a state of emergency and doesn't hold an election when his term is done. And we've heard him threaten various things like that. So one of the tactics that I put out in the chat around like general strikes, boycotts, so forth, those are the exact kind of tactics that we have seen be effective in other countries when someone is refusing to hold an election. It requires the most broad-based participation kinds of efforts. And those could include tax strikes, they could include general strikes, they could include shutting down transportation services. If something, it has to be like calling the bluff of being held hostage, our democracy being held hostage in a way that feels like an equal and opposite force, but in a way that human beings without access to that kind of power, but access to the power we have together, can utilize. But that was all my response before we even got into what David was sharing around sales tax and tariffs and all of that. So to see an income tax strike as part of a broader movement, even now, before the crisis gets even worse, I'd honestly like to hear more from David or others in this group who have watched other countries or watched this country and lived through other struggles.
I say that actually to ask you and the rest of the group here and people who've been in this for a long time, to ask you if you are aware of any instance in which collective tax refusal has happened regionally. If, for example, an escrow account has been made available in some way so that there's a real claim on the basis of the no representation, on the basis of no emergency and basic goods services that are provided for people, for the lack of really of any benefit that comes from the tax that they are supposed to be able to receive. Is there a regional way to escrow that money for a strike? Has that ever been successful?
I mean, I can only speak briefly to the fact, as I mentioned in a previous panel today, I think going in 1990, there were perhaps 40 different alternative funds, similar escrow type funds like you were talking about. Those have shrunk today. There's mainly two, one in the New England area and one in the Bay Area. They are not connected to the tax strike campaign, but someone could start one in that vein. We have resources on our website if anyone wants to start a new escrow or alternative fund of that sort. So there is experience and there's people who have been a part of things like that in the past. I don't know if anyone else would like to respond to that.
Having been involved in alternative funds from going back to the mid 80s, they're not hard to organize. I think what I would suggest is, get together with a group of people that want to do this, pool your money, and decide where to give it to. It doesn't have to be a big group. And the publicity of doing that could spread as an example.
Other questions, comments? Sure, Stefania.
Hi. So this is not a question. It's a comment and asking people, how they're dealing with it. And I go back to what Bob was saying. One of the other difficulty that I am seeing is this, and I call it American culture attitude towards security. How everybody wants some kind of insurance, over this, over that. We are so conditioned about wanting to be to feel secure and insured about things. And one of the examples that I saw recently was, you probably have all heard about unions talking about a general strike in 2028. And I could not understand what they were talking about. 2028, why? And finally, I understood that it's because of is it the Warren Taft Act? Something like that prohibits unions to strike in solidarity with each other. So so the unions are trying to convince all the unions to have their contracts expire in 2028 so that we all can have a general strike. So it's the need for that security, that we won't get messed up in because of that law if we strike in solidarity with other people, with other unions. So to me, it's really hard to. I find it difficult to explain people that this is that everything, all the movements in the past, they have won because people have put themselves on the line. They have not waited for a moment of comfort. And one of the comments on the Nutric website that really attracted me, and I don't remember who the person was, but she talked about how being a tax resistor for her was, beside all the political thing, but was really an exercise in comfort with uncertainties. That it was an exercise in uncertainties. So I wonder if other people have any thoughts or suggestions about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Hi, this is actually skipping over what Stefania just asked for and going back to Angela and Bob about local granting groups. And being in Northern California, I'm really used to the People's Life Fund that gives away interest. I mean, there was 80,000 given away. I have no idea how big the fund is. I haven't worked with it, but I have contributed to it. But the idea of just pooling local people's money and giving it away, not worrying about interest or escrow accounts or anything, I really like that idea. And that it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need a financial advisor to know where to invest the money. And if you're along with Wally and Juanita, you don't want to invest money anyway. So anyway, yes, thank you to Bob saying it's easy to do, and Angela for bringing up the question. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out in terms of support for war tax resistors that we do have the War Tax Resistance Penalty Fund, which allows people to get reimbursed for the penalties and interest, which at least in the past, it's been a slow process for the IRS to seize their money, and the penalties and interest sometimes grow almost as much as the review's tax amount. So I'll put in the chat the WTP, whatever it is, War Tax Resistance Penalty Fund.org, just the initials, and then if you're interested in that. Thanks.
Lincoln put it in the chat already.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. Good reminder. Any responses from our panelists or any other questions, comments?
I had a comment to Stefania. This has to do with how we communicate with people and across lines. If we can encourage people to discover that they are already conscientious objectors to, shall we say, bad behavior, immoral behavior, we have a much larger community. We have a universal community of conscientious objectors. In the Christian tradition or Jewish Christian tradition, there are 10 commandments. The state has claimed the right to forbid obedience to only one of them, the commandment against killing. But we should encourage our family members to think what the world would be like if nobody or very few people were conscientious objectors to anything or to the other 9 commandments. We tend to take it for granted or hope or expect that people will exercise their conscience and they will be a conscientious objector about something that matters. So that's a place to start with common ground in conversation.
Thanks, John. Other comments or questions as our time winds down? Just to make sure is there anyone's hand up that oh, I see. Now there's some hands up. Shulamith.
I wanted to make a comment about people being afraid of suffering. We're suffering anyway. And not taking action out of fear for me, it adds to my suffering, because then I'm conflicting. I'm not living with integrity. I'm
killing people. So it's just, you know, choosing which kind of suffering you want. It's not a question of I'll suffer if I resist and I won't if I don't, because you will if you don't resist. It's just be a different kind, which I think is worse, because then you're suffering without doing anything. Whereas if you're suffering because you've acted out of your conscience, there's a reward in there, there's joy in there, there's community. So thank you, that's it.
Thank you. Mish?
Thank you. I just wanted to offer, I felt really, really appreciative of the morning session and the reminder to constantly be asking myself, what do I think it means to be in integrity right now? And I, in a way, I, in a way, I guess I'm reading this conversation in the same way. And this kind of opening of what is this moment and what are different ideas and possibilities and actions for how to step into it. And I appreciated, Carl, the comment that you opened with well, let's just stop and let's think about this here. And I appreciate that invitation, and like the idea of today kind of ending on that note for myself of leaving that open and the possibility for continuing to figure that out. Thanks.
Thank you. Last call for questions or comments. Right. Maybe I'll give the last word to our speakers. So maybe if it's all right, I'll start with you, Seth. Any closing words and thoughts from our session today?
Well, it's just been wonderful. I really feel that it connects on all levels. Like I hear that what we have immediate control over. I hear what Carl was saying, and it brought back. I lived in Chicago when I was in my 20s, and I knew Kathy a little bit, Kathy Kelly, and I was really just. And then I was reading up that found an article. I was following our conversation very carefully, but I found an article on you, Carl, in Nashville about all the amazing work you've done over the decades. But everybody here, I think it's a very powerful community. I do think there's what we can do immediately as individuals and not pay and not consume. But until we also, of course, we want to get more and more collective and build the kind of mass movement of people power that can dismantle the empire. And that I think is our historic task.
Thank you, Seth. Annalisa?
Yeah, I would echo that completely. We're each finding ways of joining hands with the people that we already agree with, the people we already feel a lot in common with, and we're also finding unwelcome but important opportunities to forge new alliances and friendships as our shared need and suffering grows. It is sadly an opportunity for us to partner in unique ways or in newer ways. So I really appreciated hearing different language and different approaches that I think are spreading like seeds, all of these important movements, and then we will find ways to gather ourselves back in again as we need to.
Thank you, Annalisa. David?
We're living in interesting times, I think, as the ancient curse says. And I think a meeting like this is a good opportunity to look at the interesting times, not in the way that I often do, which is doom scrolling through all the bad news that's happening, but also to remember that we've got a lot of new opportunities to help contribute to change, because there's a lot of change going on, and some of it can be change that we initiate. And so it inspires me to come to a meeting like this and listen to people who are initiating change.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to hear from all of you and everyone's comments and participation. And so just a huge amount of thanks and appreciation for our speakers today, who obviously put so much time and effort into gathering their thoughts and sharing the rich work that they're working on. So thank you.